It began as a simple crack, a tiny fracture in the soft skin between my toes, a minor annoyance I dismissed as dryness for 15 long, agonizing years. For 15 years, I lived with a secret wound that no one else knew existed, a slow-burning inflammation that I convinced myself was just a quirk of my own body. I told myself it was normal. I told myself it was just my skin being sensitive, just the natural wear and tear of a life spent walking on concrete, on cold floors, in the relentless friction of daily existence. But the truth was far more absurd, far more humbling, and it started when I was just a child. When I was 10, maybe 12, something began to happen. It started in the shower, that sacred, steam-filled sanctuary where we all seek relief from the day's grime. Every time I bent my toes too far forward, or perhaps when I was washing between them, the skin would give way. A sharp, stinging crack would appear. It wasn't a deep wound, not immediately. It was a superficial split, a tiny fissure that hurt for a moment before fading into a dull throb. My skin has always been sensitive. It has always been prone to dryness, a trait that made me feel like I was made of paper rather than flesh. So I did what any rational person would do. I assumed it was just dry skin. I reached for the lotion. I applied the moisturizer with a sense of routine, of mundane maintenance, and then I forgot about it. I buried the sensation under a layer of self-assurance. And then the years passed. The cracks returned. They were frequent, sometimes a constant companion, other times a rare visitor that would appear only in the winter months. When I mentioned it to my mother back in those formative years, she didn't make a big deal out of it. She didn't rush me to a doctor. She didn't scream about infection or fungus or the horrors of untreated athlete's foot. She simply nodded, perhaps sowing the same logic I had. It was just dry skin. It was just my life. So I made it my life. I built a narrative around the pain. My skin is dry, I told myself. Things crack. It hurts a little bit, but I am an adult. I have responsibilities. I have bills to pay and a world to conquer. It is not a big deal. I just have to suck it up, put some lotion on it, and keep walking. For a decade and a half, I walked on broken ground. I accepted the cracking as a fundamental part of my anatomy. I normalized the pain. I convinced myself that if I just kept it moisturized, if I just kept it clean, the cracks would never get worse. I was wrong. I was so profoundly, catastrophically wrong. Fast forward to just a few months ago. The routine of my life was shattered by a sudden, violent rebellion in my own body. One of my toes began to itch. But this was not the mild, tickling itch of a mosquito bite or the dry flakiness of winter. This was a deep, burning itch, a maddening sensation that drove me to the edge of my sanity. Worse still, the toe looked different. It was purple, a deep, bruised shade of violet that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. It swelled up, a grotesque balloon of flesh that stood out against the rest of my foot. It didn't look like a wound, not at first glance. It looked like a minor injury, something that would heal on its own. I remember standing there, staring at the swollen toe, and feeling that familiar, paralyzing hesitation. I thought about making a doctor's appointment. I thought about the bureaucracy of modern healthcare, the endless phone trees, the rigid schedules that dictate our lives. Appointments were only available by phone, and only in the mornings, when I was busy, when I was working, when I was trying to survive the day. So I decided to play the waiting game. I told myself it was chilblains. It had to be. The house was cold. I never wore socks, not really. I was so used to the chill that I didn't even perceive the cold anymore. I thought if I just kept the toe warm, if I just bobbied it for a few weeks, it would fade away. It was a logical conclusion, a comforting story I told myself to avoid the terrifying possibility of something being seriously wrong. I put on socks. I wrapped my foot in warmth for an entire month. Slowly, agonizingly, the swelling went down. The itching subsided. The purple hue began to fade. I felt a surge of triumph. I had been right. It was just chilblains. It was just the cold. But then the skin on that toe started to peel. It wasn't a dramatic shedding. It was a slow, steady exfoliation, a layer of dead skin lifting away from the living tissue beneath. It didn't look terrible, not at first. It looked like a minor rash. So I did what I had done for 15 years. I reached for the lotion. I applied it with a sense of routine, of futility. I told myself to wait it out again. And then the universe intervened. I was doom-scrolling, lost in the endless, hypnotic scroll of social media, looking for distraction, looking for anything to kill the time. And there, in the algorithm's recommendation, appeared a post from a stranger on Reddit. The title caught my eye. A toe webbing cracked just like mine, just like the cracks I had endured for 15 years. The comments were a chorus of recognition. "That's athlete's foot," someone wrote. "You need to see a doctor," another insisted. "Lamisil, it works," said a third. The idea struck me like a lightning bolt. It can't possibly be athlete's foot, I thought, the denial rising in my throat like a wall. I wash my feet. I don't go barefoot outside. I've had this for ages. All of the pictures online of athlete's foot look absolutely horrible. They look like rotting flesh. They look like a horror movie. They looked totally different from the minor cracks between my toes. But the idea lingered. It gnawed at me. It sat in the back of my mind, a small, persistent voice that wouldn't be silenced. I looked it up. I read the symptoms. I read the stories of people who had ignored it for years, who had thought it was just dry skin, just a minor inconvenience, until it became a chronic, spreading infection. The treatment was simple. It was cheap. It was Lamisil cream, available at any store, over the counter, without a prescription. It wasn't that expensive. It was nothing compared to the cost of 15 years of pain. It was nothing compared to the cost of the uncertainty, the fear, the slow erosion of my own body. So I bought it. I walked out of the pharmacy with a small tube of cream, totally thinking I was wasting my money. I was going to apply it for a week, maybe two, and then throw it away if nothing changed. I was going to prove that I was right. I was going to prove that it was just dry skin. I began the regimen. I religiously put it on my dogs every evening. I treated the cream like a sacred elixir. And then I did something I had never done before. I dried between my toes after I showered. I took a towel and I meticulously, gently dried the spaces between my toes, even though I thought it was pointless. I thought the water would just dry on its own. I thought it was a waste of time. And then the skin looked worse. It looked absolutely terrible. The skin between my toes peeled where it had cracked before. It looked raw. It looked inflamed. It looked like the infection was spreading, like I was making it worse by treating it. I panicked. I thought I had made a mistake. I thought I had ruined my feet. But then something miraculous happened. It wasn't cracking. For the first time in 15 years, the skin between my toes did not crack. The fissures that had been my constant companion, the tiny wounds that had opened and closed for half my life, they were gone. The peeling stopped. The inflammation began to subside. The burning itch vanished, replaced by a silence I had never known. I can't prove it with a lab test. I can't take a sample of whatever fungus was living between my toes and show it to a microscope. I can't bring the evidence to a court of law. But the evidence was there, in the silence, in the lack of pain, in the smooth, unbroken skin that had finally healed. It was athlete's foot. 15 years of cracking, of pain, of lotion, of denial. I had been treating a fungal infection with moisturizer. I had been trying to hydrate a parasite. I had been ignoring the signs because they didn't fit my narrative. I had been living in a world where the truth was too inconvenient to accept. It is not normal for the skin between your toes to crack. It is not a quirk of your body. It is not a sign of sensitive skin. It is a sign of infection. And it is not useless to dry between your toes after you shower. It is essential. It is the first line of defense. I don't know if I'm helping anyone by saying this. I don't know if my story will change your life. But I hope that if you are reading this and you have a crack between your toes that won't heal, you will listen. You will not ignore it. You will not tell yourself it's just dry skin. You will not wait for it to get worse. You will go to the store. You will buy the cream. You will dry your feet. You will treat it. Because 15 years is a long time to live with a problem that could have been solved in 15 minutes. Now, as I sit here looking at my healed feet, I am left with a single haunting question. What would you do? If you had a crack between your toes that lasted for years, would you ignore it? Would you assume it was just your skin? Or would you listen to the voice inside you that told you something was wrong? Drop it in the comments. Tell me your story. Tell me what you would do. Because the truth is, we're all more fragile than we think, and sometimes the smallest crack can tell the biggest story.